everyone, welcome back. I hope you're having a great weekend, day, whatever is going on your end. I hope it's going great. Welcome back to Let's Have Tea, and today I am doing a follow-up on the video I did last time, which was how I navigated a career pivot. But of course I do not come to you empty-handed, because I have with me a lemon and ginger brew that is absolutely refreshing. And I think I will make tea a permanent feature of this podcast, and maybe one day I'll show you all my collection of tea, but that's not today. Today I want to build up on what I spoke about last week. So after the video I uploaded last week, I got a few comments, and I also got messages from people who know me who were like, oh my goodness, great video, and I have this question and I am not going to post it on the channel because I've got your number, so I'm just going to text you. And some of the questions were things like, what test did you take, and like what are some of the practical ideas and thoughts you can really share, because that was more like a story and blah blah blah, things like that. And today I thought, okay, also just reflecting on some of the conversations I've had with people, I will build up and share a little bit more. So actually quite recently I had a conversation with a friend who was telling me about how it felt like her career wasn't really coming to anything. Like it felt like she had done a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of that. In other words, she was feeling like a generalist. And if we're being honest, we live in a world that really celebrates specialists, right? Like if you think of the people who get Nobel, what's that thing? I can't believe I've forgotten it. The award scientists get, the Nobel laureate, yes, the Nobel Award, that's what it's called, isn't it? Yeah, so people will get that, are people who have focused on a particular problem for like 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Those are the people who get celebrated. You hardly meet people who have been like doing bits and pieces here and there and learning, like basically people who are going wide and not necessarily going deep. You hardly see them being celebrated. And I felt that before I navigated my career pivot. And I would just like to thank David Epstein for writing the book Range. Everybody needs to read the book Range. And if you don't read it, please just watch his TED Talk, because it's like a therapy session. I promise, it is a therapy session. Absolutely worth reading. So when I was navigating my career pivot, I also had this sense of my career hadn't come to a certain point, like a certain identity that I could point to. There were people who studied medicine, so they were medical doctors, and people who studied engineering, and so they were engineers. I, even though I studied engineering, did not have an undergrad in engineering. My undergrad was in biotechnology, and despite the fact that I got a distinction in my first master's and I went on to do a PhD, I could not register as a professional engineer because I did not have a bachelor's in engineering, or at least that's what they told me. So I was navigating all of this with an identity crisis of, so do I consider myself a scientist, or do I consider myself an engineer? As a matter of fact, there was a time I wrote on LinkedIn that the word sciengineer, which is basically a merge of scientist and engineer, should be a thing, because there were so many of us in that space, and we were living in countries where regulations were so tough that we could not really break into the world of engineering, right? So because this whole series is about everything I wish I knew in my 20s / everything I'm glad I know now, I want to put it out there that if you're a young person in your 20s and you're navigating your career and it feels like it's not coming to a certain fixed identity, I would like to recommend that you read the book Range. Range is a book that basically talks about why generalists are amazing people to have, particularly in leadership. People who are widely read, not necessarily deeply read, are probably better at solving problems, addressing issues, and maybe leading others. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be a specialist or that specialists are bad. By all means, if you wish to be a specialist, or if life has afforded you the luck to specialize in one thing and go deep, please do so. But the point is, if you're feeling lost because you feel like, oh, I haven't built my career to a point where it's like I can have a real identity and I'm having an identity crisis around exactly what I do, please read Range, because it is absolutely amazing. The gist of it, I'm not telling you the entire book, but the gist of it is basically the idea that when we're young, we're told to pick a specialization before we even know ourselves, right? And I spoke about this in my last video. So you pick a specialization, but the world has become so complex and interwoven that even when you pick a specialization, you might find that you're interested in something else. So you add that little bit on and you add that little bit on. Like I tell everyone I did a biotech engineering degree, but I also have a certificate in strategic management because I was interested in understanding things like product differentiation and how companies communicate value of their products and how a CEO takes a strategic vision and implements it. So I was interested, so I did the whole course and I excelled. So point is, I had a strong identity crisis. I didn't even know what companies to apply to at the time I was doing my job applications. So my point of this is that everything comes to a single point, and that single point comes when you know yourself. So as you get older and you're taking your wealth of experiences, you will also develop certain interests that will then guide you into where to apply all of these skills. So people often say things like, oh, I mean, I've been asked this question, like, so you were like in science and then you went into engineering and now you work in policy, and how do you use all of those skills? Because a lot of people assume that when you're in policy, you're basically just like regurgitating Twitter arguments. That's not what happens in policy. Policy is tough. And policy has a lot of data analysis as well, because you can't make decisions without having adequate data and context. So your head is thinking of very complex issues and how best to achieve the balance between like economic interest and political interest as well as social interest. So that's not an easy job. And having my engineering and science background actually helps me in how I look at problems and how I define them and which problem I decide must be solved. So this didn't come from me studying policy in my undergrad, but it came from all my life experiences and all the other random things I did, like that certificate in strategic management. So point is to say, if you are suffering through an identity crisis as you try to figure out your career and you're feeling like, oh, I'm such a generalist, I'm not a specialist, so I don't really fit in anywhere, honey, you're going to fit in somewhere, and when you fit in there, you will be amazing. But please read Range, because that book is like therapy, I promise you. One of the best books out there. And obviously now the question is, how do you figure out what you want to focus on? So when it comes to what you want to focus on, I think my big thing is people are likely to pick what is popular to focus on. I mean, you know how everybody these days is like, I just need to get into tech. If I can get into tech, I'm making 200 grand a year and my life will be great. You can be making that 200 grand a year and be miserable still, because you haven't found exactly what you're good at. And you haven't found, should I say what the Japanese call it, ikigai. I hope I'm saying that correctly, but basically the purpose of your life. And I'm not talking about purpose in terms of like a spiritual sense. I'm talking about purpose in terms of a flow between who you are, what you're paid to do, and the impact that you have. You know, that Venn diagram. So how do you then figure that out? For me, when I was thinking through, okay, what exactly would I like to do? I had options. I had an option, for example, to go into data analysis, which I am good at because I love stats. But I thought to myself, if I look at the career of a data analyst in terms of like the day-to-day, it would only use like a couple of my skills. It wouldn't use, and I want to use my entire skill set. I want to go to work every day and have like this toolbox where I can pull out different skills, because the problems are different every day. So I could have been a data analyst, but I figured no, that wasn't the right fit. And if I'd done that, people would have been like, yes, get into tech, get the money, get the money. But I had to sit with myself and do what I call a personal SWOT analysis. And to be honest, I should design a workbook on this, because when I was doing my PhD, I also mentored research students, like younger research students who were like starting out their masters and were new to research. And part of the workshop that I trained them, well, I planned this workshop and I facilitated it. But part of the workshop was what I called a personal SWOT analysis, where they would sit with their strengths, their weaknesses, the opportunities they had in the environment, as well as the threats that could, you know, affect their strengths. And by doing that, they would then come to an understanding of, before we even start the research, where do we need help? And based on that, they were able to work harder, succeed easily, and complete their research on time. So that was the whole point of this workshop that I had set up with the postgraduate school. And when it came to the time for me to transition and decide on what I wanted to do, I also did the same test. I sat with myself, I did this personal SWOT test, and I figured, okay, these are my strengths, these are things I'm good at. If I choose this career, it would only take 2 out of like maybe 8 strengths. So I don't want to do just that. I want something that at least ticks 6 out of 8. But that's just me. You don't have to tick 6 out of 8. You just need to figure out what works for you and what's going to make you happy. So doing that personal SWOT test was something that I really engaged in, and I did not do it just once. I did it multiple times. I took my strengths test from the test that I'd done earlier when I went to that conference. Please watch the last video so that you get the context. I took my strengths test, I read it multiple times. I looked at like things that have been said about me by colleagues, by friends, by former managers, and also used that to figure out exactly what I was doing. So in addition to doing the SWOT test yourself, you also need to go out there and talk to your colleagues and your friends to be like, what do you think I'm good at? And be ready for their feedback. You might think you're good at something and your colleagues are like, you suck, you are terrible at that. And you've just got to be willing to accept it, okay? Like, for example, I mean, this is quite random, but I used to think that I was good at keeping a poker face. I am not good at keeping a poker face. If you say something that shocks me, surprises me, or makes me think that this is stupid, you will see it on my face. So I had to talk to my friends and I'll be like, yeah, I'm keeping a straight face. But then they're like, why are you looking at me like that? And I'm like, oh, can you see what I'm thinking? But that's basic, that's very random. But the point is, going around and talking to people would also help you get a clear picture. Now, do not expect this process to be quick. And this is something I have noticed, especially with like younger people who are feeling like, oh, I want to transition my career, blah, blah, blah. They're like, oh, if I can just get the certification and just get into the stint and then it's done. If you're really trying to navigate a career pivot and you want to go into something you know you will always enjoy, at least for the foreseeable future, and it's not something you're just getting into just so that you can get paid and then feel like your life is meaningless yet again, it will take time. Don't look at like a 2-month, 3-month timeline. Mine took me a whole year. Some people it takes them 6 to 9 months. It totally depends. But be willing to give it time. I always say, and this is my favorite saying to myself, whenever I'm dealing with a problem, be it financial, health, social, whatever it is, I always say, give it a year. I give everything a year. It doesn't matter what it is. I give everything a year to transform, and I work during that year to make it happen. So don't try to rush the process, okay? I also went to therapy. That doesn't mean you've got to go to therapy, because when you go to therapy, that's not the only thing that's going to come up. Trust me. All the issues you've been dealing with since you were a child, everything your auntie said to you when you were a baby, when she thought you were dark skinned and you didn't look pretty enough, that's going to come up too. So maybe you don't want to complicate your life like I did and go to therapy, but therapy was amazing. We'll save that for another video. Maybe you simply want to spend time reflecting by yourself in order to figure out exactly what it is that you want to do. But point is, make sure you're honest about the process. Don't pick something simply because it's popular, and speak to the people around you, because they know you. They know your blind spots as well. There are things you don't see about yourself that they would see. The last bit is, should you even be navigating a career pivot to start with? Now, at the time, many people think of navigating a career pivot. They're unhappy where they work. They hate their jobs. They don't like most of the people they work with. They're just like, I just want to get the hell out of here. So they don't want to, they just don't want to be in that environment. You have to be able to tell the difference between whether or not it's the job you hate or the career itself. Now, I will be honest, at the time I was navigating my career pivot, I didn't hate my job. The environment was very toxic. I'll just put that out there. The environment was very toxic. But I also was very clear in my understanding that I would not do good sitting in a lab wearing a hard hat all day with very little human interaction. I had gotten to a point where I was very curious about how all these solutions we craft can be brought into the market and actually impact people's lives. But also, I was also part of the idea of, why are we designing these solutions if the regulations and policies are not even trying to ensure that people are safe and healthy. So because my interests were already shifting from what I was doing, I knew for sure that the career was the problem. In some cases, you have to be honest with yourself. It's just where you work. You enjoy what you do, but where you work absolutely sucks. So you have to figure out, how do I navigate this and how do I get out of here? That doesn't mean you have to do a career pivot. That means you simply have to leave that damn job and all the crazy people in there and go do something else with yourself, all right? Go work elsewhere. And I know that's not easy because there's this global recession that's sort of looming over our heads. It's like, I think it's like playing hide and seek with us, where it's just like, hey, I'm coming, and it's like, just kidding. But point is, consider the idea that it might not be the career that's the problem and it's just a job. People also asked me, what test did you take? It is called the Clifton's Strengths Test by Gallup. And it is an amazing test. I think everyone should take it. It really gives you an insight into who you are. And the trick of the test is to not think too much about your answers. Simply pick the answers that resonate with you and just keep going, and you'll be surprised by the end. But it is a paid test. So if you're not willing to take that, you can take the High Five Strength Test, which is a cheaper, well, it's not cheaper, it's free, and it's quite similar. When I did the High Five test, I got a result that was very similar to my Clifton Strength Test. So I'm guessing you can do that, and please know that none of these companies have paid me to advertise for them. I'm simply telling you what I did. What was the other question I had? Because I believe I've sort of shared some of the practical bits of what I did. I guess some other advice I just gave now, and this will probably be closing off this topic if I don't get any other questions, and moving on to something new next week. So yeah, I think I've covered all the practical bits. I can't think of anything else. If I do get questions on the channel, friends, please don't text me. Don't text me the question. Put them on YouTube. I know you have my number, but let's just keep it nice and friendly and fun on WhatsApp, and just put the questions on the comments. I also need you to share these videos with people. I'm not sure what I'll focus on next time. Might be something maybe related to religion. Religion's always a good one. Everything I wish I knew back then. Everything I'm glad I know now. That would be great. But yeah, can't tell for sure. Depends on how people interact with this. But I hope you found this helpful, and I hope it's been great. So I wish you good luck on navigating your career pivot, on finding what exactly excites you, on not choosing what is popular. And also, I need to say this, and this has just popped into my head, that you should also know that when you start to navigate a career pivot, you will have many temptations to stay where you are. And this was such an interesting thing. If you've read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, I know some people say they hate that book. I don't know why. There's nothing wrong with the book as far as I'm concerned. It has some interesting lessons. But if you've read it, you're probably aware there was a time when the shepherd boy seemed to have found like an oasis with the girl he loved, and he was going to stay there. But then there was something that also urged him to move on and continue like in searching for his dream and things like that. When I was applying to go do my policy program, I got invited. Actually, I'd been accepted. I was getting ready to go. I got invited to apply for an assistant professor role. And that was the craziest thing, because they invited me. I had interviewed with them before for a lower position, and they had rejected me because they said, listen, you are overqualified. They then invited me to apply for an assistant professorship. And it was the biggest temptation of my life to say, listen, I've been climbing this ladder all the way to the top. Rather than going sideways, why can't I just stay on this ladder and go for this role? But something in me said, you will stay on this ladder, and in the next 3 years, you will be asking yourself why you did not take the opportunity to go sideways and do what you identified through reflection over a whole year. As a matter of fact, more than a year. You ask yourself why you did not jump at that opportunity, and you might never have it again. So I declined that and decided to go with going back to being a student in my 30s. And to be honest, best decision I ever made. And like I said in my last video, fortune favors the brave. So please do not be afraid. Fortune favors the brave, do not be afraid. I'm such a rhymer. I'm a rhymer. So yeah, I guess that's all I have to share about this. Think of all the practical bits that I've shared with you, and if you have any questions, please ask me. I will have my cup of tea now. It gets cold every time I record these videos, but it's all good. I will reheat it. And yeah, see you again next week.